Let me go to my notes here. So thank you everybody for joining us today for the strategies for recharge on your farm workshop event. You might be a grower interested in implementing recharge or just curious about how this process might work on your farm, or you've already tried recharge and are looking to learn more about best management practices. We hope today's webinar will answer all of your questions about recharge and how this conservation practice might look on your farm. I also wanted to share some good news about recharge to you all. There is new potential funding in future years, so please stay tuned. And I'll do a brief introduction of our presenters today. So first we have Daniel Mountjoy, who leads Sustainable Conservation's Water for the Future program to support groundwater sustainability through collaboration with farmers, researchers, and agencies. He directly works to develop groundwater recharge decision support tools for farmers and water management agencies, and informing policy decisions to ensure that business, community, and environmental aspects of water reliability are considered. Next, we have Rogell Rogers, who is the agronomist for Sustainable Conservation. He has been a grower of various vegetable crops, ornamental shrubs and trees, stone fruit, and nut trees for 30 years. More recently, he has worked as a citrus production manager for Duarte Tree Nursery and as staff agronomist for A&L Western Laboratory in Modesto, California. Next, we have Michael Roots, who is a specialist in field outreach and education for the Almond Board of California. He has a background in farm management of tree nut crops and some experience with groundwater recharge previously. He now works in a role of supporting California almond growers and connecting them to resources that the Almond Board offers. And next, we have Aysha Massell. She's the Central Valley Water Program Director for Sustainable Conservation. She works on complex multidisciplinary projects involving field data collection, analysis, development of guidance, and coordinating outreach with diverse stakeholders. We have Cole Upton, Brian Davis, and Ralph Pizzaresi, who are all local Madera and Chowchilla growers that will be talking about their experiences with recharge today. And lastly, we have Wendy Rash, who is a state water quality specialist at USDA NRCS California, and has been working at the intersection of agriculture and conservation for more than 20 years in California. As a graduate student, a farm worker, Resource Conservation District employee, and NRCS conservationist. With NRCS, she has served as a soil conservationist, district conservationist, and now focuses on water quality issues statewide as a state water quality specialist. Wendy is a graduate of UC Davis with master's degrees in international agricultural development and soil science. Wendy has been a certified crop advisor since 2010. So if you have any questions throughout the duration of the webinar, please use the Q&A option or chat to type your questions in, and our presenters will do their best at the end of their presentations to answer any questions. And also we'll have a Q&A session at the very end of the workshop. If you have any questions, you could raise your hand and I'll unmute you and you could ask your questions to the panelists of presenters. Hope you enjoyed today's workshop. And now I'll pass it along to Daniel Mountjoy, who will begin the introduction to recharge.
Thanks very much, Amy. Folks all hear me? You're able to hear me? There, just confirm.
Yes, we could hear you.
Okay, great. So let me just get the PowerPoint here. Can you also see the PowerPoint? Great. Yes. Okay, so I just want to first start out saying that this whole idea of recharge hopefully will come across to all of you as positive news about what you can do now to offset the effects of SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. As most of you are well aware, new regulations are in place to protect the quantity and quality of groundwater that we all rely on for drinking and for agricultural purposes. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requires your local groundwater sustainability agency, or GSA, to be responsible to bring groundwater into balance over the next 18 years in your basin. The Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program and new nitrate management zones are also in place to protect groundwater quality and ensure that our communities have safe drinking water. And these policies undoubtedly are either already affecting your farming or will affect your farming in the future, either by limiting your groundwater pumping or restricting applications of fertilizer. But the good news is that you can offset both of the severity of these new restrictions by doing groundwater recharge on your lands. And so we really think that recharge is a great solution to address both our groundwater quantity and quality shortages and issues. So as by way of introduction, I think it's probably clear that recharge is not a new idea, but we need more of it. Over the past 100 years, we've reshaped where and when water flows in the valley. We've installed and built massive reservoirs. We've built levees along our rivers. We've created diversions to move water into canals for agricultural purposes. And we've massively increased the conservation of water through drip irrigation systems. The combination of all of these factors has actually created the unintended effect of reducing groundwater replenishment. So our aquifers can't keep up with pumping. By constraining the water to the rivers, we've lost the connection to the floodplains, and water is now being conserved so effectively through drip systems that less water is returning to the groundwater. Many irrigation districts have used their irrigation canals and recharge basins to capture peak flows in the district to try and offset some of this loss of natural recharge. But with more intense rainstorms and warming temperatures, more land is going to be needed to capture the peak flood events that are anticipated. On-farm recharge is one of the ways to do that. And there's a lot of interest in expanding this idea right now in the state, including the concept of FloodMAR, which is flood managed aquifer recharge. It offers multiple benefits for farmers and nature and people by reoperating our reservoirs, which don't have the capacity to capture the largest storm events, nor be able to hold enough water through multiple drought years. And the idea now is to release some of that water for groundwater recharge and make use of the aquifers underneath our farms and cities to store that water and make it available during drought periods, and also to replenish or raise the groundwater level to benefit fisheries and other habitat issues along our rivers. So farmland provides an incredible opportunity. It's accessible, it's available. Many districts have the water conveyance already to move the water onto those lands. And it's much cheaper than building new reservoirs or trying to build more recharge basins in some locations. And you can do it the next time water's available. And I know we're in the middle of a drought right now, but water will come again, and it's probably going to come in greater quantities. And being ready to capture it is really key to being able to maintain our water balance in the valley. I want to share just some of the results in Madera Irrigation District, where we've been working now for a number of years with the district and made use of water availability in 2017 and 2019. And many of you were part of this program. And I think the results really speak for themselves as to how much water can be captured. In the 2017 winter program, between January and April, 104 growers signed up for the program on 223 parcels. In 2019, that number jumped to 322 growers on almost 300 parcels. And in 2019, just want to emphasize that almost 40,000 acres of Madera Irrigation District lands were used by many of you to capture 17,000 acre feet of water. Now, some of that water was beneficial to the crop themselves and was taken up through evapotranspiration. But about 9,000 net acre feet ended up going to the groundwater basin to replenish the groundwater supply. And for comparison, all of Madera Irrigation District's basins in 2019 captured 8,000 acre feet of water. So you, the farmers, along with the district, doubled or more than doubled the amount of recharge in that one season through using farmland to capture the water. So that's kind of an example of what's possible. The types of crops that took that water in 2019 were predominantly almonds on over 3,000 acres, grapes, almost 2,000 acres, along with some silage fields for corn, wheat, and alfalfa, some pistachio lands. When we look at how much water was actually recharged on each of those acres, the yellow yellow squares here indicate the averages. And it may not look like a lot, approximately about a half a foot per area of land was of extra water was applied. And that's not a ton of water if we only get that much water every couple of years. But notice that in the darker blue bar, some farmers put on almost 2 feet of water. And that gives us an indication of what's possible. While many farmers may have only started with about a half foot to test it out and see how it worked in that first trial, we know that it's possible to recharge 2 feet and perhaps even more on some of the lands in the district. And so that suggests that there's a lot of potential to capture more than what has been done so far. When we think about different strategies to achieve recharge, the districts are considering recharge basins as well as on-farm recharge. The cost of on-farm recharge, as I mentioned earlier, is much cheaper, as low as $40 if you already have irrigation gravity-fed systems and your fields are fairly level and you have berms of some sort to contain that water. It could go up to about $100 an acre foot if you have to put in berms, and for other field preparation costs involved with that. Certainly more if you have to install pipelines, and Wendy will talk more about that later in the talk. Irrigation districts, construction costs, permitting, buying the land, when averaged out over the multiple years that these basins are effective, is more expensive and takes longer to establish them, but is also certainly a viable option, but is more expensive and does take more time. If you're thinking about doing recharge on your land, there's a number of different strategies to consider. It doesn't necessarily have to look like the active farmland image in the top left here, where there's cropland being flooded. It could be fallow farmland, oftentimes a good strategy for lands adjacent to rivers where flooding might occur anyway. And then there's several new approaches, including subterranean subsurface drains that are being put in to run the water below the root zone. If you're reestablishing or putting in a new orchard or vineyard, you can consider this option. Or small recharge basins on your land, perhaps only a couple of acres in a corner of the field, that again avoids timing and coordination with cultural operations on the farmland. The choice of method really depends on the frequency of the water availability, how flood prone your property is, the site suitability of the soils, and what crops you have growing, and whether or not you want to put water on the crops, the perennial crops that are there, or work it in amongst your annual crops. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of different factors that obviously have to be in place in order to create successful recharge on your land. And the first one is water availability. We're in a drought right now. Now's the time to be thinking about when is water available in wet years. And this is a graph from Merced River showing water availability in the green bars that's in excess of environmental flows shown as the blue bars down below. And the distribution of water in our wet years typically can start as early as October if there's some release from the reservoirs to make space for floodwaters, and then peaks with snowmelt, more likely in April, May, and June, as shown here, which starts to overlap with the irrigation season shown in the orange bars. So dormant season recharge in December and January is certainly a good option, but it may not be the time when the most water is available. if we want to capture the most water available, we have to think about coordination of the conveyance system to make sure there's room for irrigation demand, but also be able to carry the extra water that is available at that same time of year. Which brings us then to the second category of thing to be considering, which is what is the district's conveyance? Can they get the water to your field? Do they have the water rights to be able to provide that water to you at the time of year when you can take it on your farm? And questions about whose water is it? In Madera Irrigation District, that water is the district's water, and the recharged water remains for the benefit of the community. Other districts have taken different approaches to this in terms of either selling the water to the landowner and having them recharge it and having it as credit towards their own groundwater pumping. But that's really up to the GSA in your area and to the conversations with your district. The next piece of conveyance, of course, is how well prepared is your farm to be able to take that water? Do you have floodgates that you can apply water to the farm, or do you need to use temporary pipe to move water onto the farm, out onto your fields? Some folks have considered whether or not their sprinkler irrigation systems can put enough water on the field to achieve recharge in excess of what the crop demands. And that'll all depend on the design of your system. The next big question is site suitability of the land. And UC Davis developed a soils agricultural groundwater banking index to give an indication of how suitable is the soil to convey the water through the top 6 feet. And then Land IQ worked with the Almond board to develop a recharge suitability index shown here on the right to really look at not just the soil type and whether you can get the water through the top 6 feet, but whether putting that water into the subsurface will actually make it to your aquifer and replenish groundwater, or will it get stopped by a clay layer that causes it to mound up and perhaps cause water logging in the root zone. This map is really helpful and is available on a website that we've made available through the GRAT viewer, earthgenome.org, and allows you to drill down, take a close look at your own field site to see how well your site is rated for overall suitability for capturing excess water. This is showing the bypass off the San Joaquin River in your region. But perhaps one of the best tests of whether your site is suitable is walking the land. In this photo, what we can see on this farm is the presence of weeds here in the foreground, suggesting some soils that hold water really well. And then suddenly the weeds die out and we have a sandy area, well suited for rapid infiltration. And you probably know this from your own irrigation experience, where those sandy locations are. And you might want to consider recharge focused on some of those areas, even berming up around them to consolidate the water into those locations. The fourth category is crop suitability. And Rogell is going to talk more about this in a few moments. But this is really a critical piece for evaluating compatibility. And we've been exploring now for the last number of years the weekly capacity of certain crops to receive water in excess of the crop's water demand. And working with DWR's irrigation models and soil types, we can take a look and see how long it takes to get soils up to somewhat less than soil saturation. We don't want to see complete soil saturation because that would mean a depletion of oxygen for the roots. But taking up to about 75% seems to be a fairly safe bet. And then allowing time for the soil to dry back down to field capacity before reapplying water allows those roots to gain oxygen again and recover. This best available data based on this model, but also farmer and field agronomist experience, has led us to develop a crop compatibility calendar for the crops listed here for grapes, alfalfa, walnuts, almonds, pistachio, and of course fallow land is really just limited by the soil's ability to take the water. I just want to give you an example here of one farmer on grapes on a very well-drained sandy soil. with just 14 days on these 13.7 acres of Zinfandel. This is up in the Lodi area. He put on 120 inches per acre of water. The crop took about 6.5 inches of that, leaving 113 inches to go to direct recharge in 14 days. This averaged out to be 6 to 8 inches a day, and in 2018 resulted in 18 acre-feet of water being recharged in that 14-day period. This is an example of a really well-suited site with a crop that's well tolerant of excess water and infiltration rates that were just amazing. Even if you don't have water available, maybe only every 3 to 5 years, putting 18 feet of water in the ground easily makes up for the water demand on that crop for the next multiple years. If you think of a 3 acre-foot demand or 4 acre-foot demand on a crop, 18 acre-feet covers you for the next 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years. So some really significant benefits from recharge on certain sites. We've used these examples with farmers on the ground, many of them in Madera Irrigation District, to develop a groundwater recharge assessment tool that Madera Irrigation District uses, as well as Tulare Irrigation District, and now several other districts are building this. We're building this tool out for them that helps think about where, when, and how, and at what cost recharge can be done across an entire district. And Madera uses it for helping to prioritize recharge if there's a shortage of water, to make sure we're putting water on the best sites. And one thing we've also done with Madera is take a look at the groundwater sustainability plan that took a fairly conservative estimate of how much recharge might occur in the district through phases 1 and 2. And their estimate was that by 2030, average annual recharge in the district could be about 2,000 acre-feet. When we plugged that into GRAT using their assumptions of the GSP, we came up with fairly similar acreage, average acre-foot of water recharge. But when we looked at how much recharge was actually achieved in 2017 and 2019, and turned that into average annual acre-feet of 1,700, when we project that across all the suitable lands in the district, in other words, if every farmer in the district took water at the rates that the farmers did in 2017 and 19, the district can be recharging almost 18,000 acre-feet of water on average annually. And this brings the district into almost significant balance and indicates the potential there if farmers all participate in programs like this. So just in conclusion, we are in a drought. It's unlikely that there's going to be water this year. We don't know if there will be next year. But what can you do now in preparation for the next wet year? And some of the main things to be thinking about is deciding on which fields are most suitable. Use that site index I showed you from Land IQ. Be thinking about how you could prepare your fields. Could you do some land smoothing next time you have a crop out? What sort of water infrastructure do you maybe want to build with some support from NRCS? What crops are going to be coming out over the next year or two, and might you want to redesign your field layout, build berms, again, add water infrastructure, and consider what crop types to plant. And Rogell will talk more about this, as will Michael. And then confirm water availability from the district that you work in, Chowchilla or Madera, and discuss what sort of incentives the GSA might offer for farmers that do take the water. And again, finally, think about seeking funding for support for any projects you might want to be building, and you'll hear more about that from Wendy. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Daniel. And we'll pass it along. If anybody has any questions, please type them in the chat for Daniel. Otherwise, we could move on to Rogell.
This out of the way. Can everyone hear me? Oops.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. All righty. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rogell Rogers. I would like to start off by just doing a brief overview of my talk. I'm going to talk about crop susceptibility, rootstocks versus scions, or crop suitability, rootstocks versus scions or cultivars, and on-farm field design to regulate water levels and uniform distribution, as well as nitrogen management in anticipation of on-farm recharge. All right, let's move on. So rootstocks, one has to have some history, some background on their rootstocks. So far as rootstock susceptibility to disease, there is differences in rootstocks. For example, Hansen 536 has a very rootstock, a peach almond hybrid rootstock. Hansen 536 has a very high risk to wet soils. It likes calcareous soils. It's drought tolerant. Higher potential of contracting root and crown rot Phytophthora, however, compared to Lovell and Nemagard, which have a lower potential to contract root or crown rot disease. It's a little more tolerant to wet conditions. And if you also consider the varieties like Mariana 2624, it's highly resistant to both crown rot and root rot caused by Phytophthora species. Looking at the scion, scions can be susceptible to many foliar diseases. For example, almonds, you have to consider what diseases they are more susceptible to. The cultivar nonpareil is not very susceptible, has very good resistance against almond anthracnose, for example, whereas torricaco is very susceptible. So there's comparisons between different scions or cultivars in terms of susceptibility. So you want to have some history on your scion wood or your cultivar, your fruiting scion wood, and your rootstock to determine what are your disease susceptibilities in anticipation of on-farm recharge, which is going to carry higher humidity, of course. And so background on rootstocks and scions so far as what diseases they are susceptible to is important. On-farm flood irrigation versus drip irrigation is the question. Flood, more efficient than drip by far. So you want to consider temporary flood hose setups to be installed if drip system is the primary irrigation source. And for most of us nowadays, drip systems have become the norm. So here's an example of a flood irrigation on farm in a dormant grape situation. The field was set up with inflatable gated pipe, 6 inches in height, 6 to 12 inches in height, whatever you prefer to target for your particular crop, based on what you know about its root system, its root depth, its root distribution. 6 to 12 inches in height berms could be set up around the perimeter to maintain the water on the site. Also, furrows in the plant rows, as you can see here, can help facilitate infiltration rates of the water and reduce puddling of water. And they tend not to be sealed by water that's carrying sediments by chance. So it promotes better water infiltration rates into the soil under flood conditions. Controlled flooding can be done by setting up 3 to 4 rows at a time within your field by berming intermittently in the plant row or berming at the end of the plant row. And this will promote uniform distribution of water, allowing you to target certain height. For example, you could target 6-inch height level, 8-inch, 12-inch level of water, flood water. And once that water reaches your targeted height, you can breach the berm and pass it on to the next 3 or 4 rows that you have burned, allowing the water to move through the field gradually, penetrate, infiltrate at the targeted height that you've selected for your field or crop. Oops, I'm sorry. Different techniques to consider in preparation of on-farm recharge, texture, different field conditions to consider. In this situation, we've got a plant line that's been placed on a raised bed or planted on a raised bed to really help under flood conditions, because this allows the plant crown and root system up 4 inches at the top or so to be aerated during a controlled flood by, designating the height of the flood water to reach maybe 6 inches, where your berm is set at 8-inch height. So you've got a couple of inches of aeration. Things to consider, practices to implement to facilitate the infiltration rate is deep tillage before planting. Between plant row, depending on, and I say depending on the crop root system. What's the crop depth? What's the crop distribution? Be careful about between plant row tillage. Can be tricky. Cover crops can help infiltration rates by creating air pockets. The roots create air pockets so that the water percolates down and infiltrates faster. Alternate row irrigation can be used to facilitate a grower when there is need for field operations to continue, such as fungicide sprays for flowers. If you're doing a in-season on-farm recharge, surge irrigation, on-off water to allow water to infiltrate without excessive ponding and flooding, for example. And oops, I'm sorry. Also, complete flood irrigation is very useful in dormant situations when farm operations are at a minimum and you decide that you have conditions that will allow for complete flooding. Oops. Let's see here. Next slide. I'm sorry. Flood irrigation and almond, flood irrigation on annual crops, that is. Drink a little water here. These are, looks like melons, and this is kind of a traditional setup of flooding in an annual crop, kind of old school setup. We don't see a whole lot of this anymore. Most of our crops are on drip lines, but use of the berms and checks within the plant row and at the end of the plant lines can help regulate the height and the flows of the waters and facilitate infiltration rates. Consider your crop root system to decide what height of flood you want. And let's see. This next slide, I wanted to talk briefly about nitrogen management as it relates to anticipation of the flood event. And many of you are well aware of nitrogen management plans, and you conduct nitrogen management plans already. So basically, you want to look at the nitrogen applied in early spring based on the requirement for that particular crop, total nitrogen requirement. And you also want to look at water, soil, and plant tissue testing throughout the season to get a baseline on how much nitrogen load, nutrient load you have, and what do you need to finish the crop based on the targeted total nitrogen required to produce that crop. Here is an example of a crop that has about 49 parts per million of nitrate ion, and to convert that, and I just realized this is irrigation water analysis. This is not the surface flow, excess surface flows that would be flooding the field. Of course, those waters are virtually free of nitrate, nitrogen, pretty clean waters, snow and stream waters. But I'm talking about irrigation water that you're using throughout the year. Analyze that water, the soil, and the plant tissue. Testing is important. The timing and placement of the nutrients done to avoid leaching from recharge water is most important. In this situation, you have 49 parts per million nitrate. If you multiply that times a factor of 0.61, that will bring you to pounds of nitrate, pounds of nitrogen per acre foot. It's about 30 pounds. If you got a crop that needs 3 acre feet of water to produce a crop, then you know that you're going to carry about 90 pounds of nitrogen in the water. So if that crop needs 250 pounds to finish itself, you know already that you only need to apply about 160 pounds in your program during the season. And here's a general soil analysis that was done in October. And you can see it right away that the soil level has about 148 parts per million of nitrate nitrogen. And generally these soil samples are assumed to be taken from about a 6-inch depth. This is way in excess of what you would want to target going into October or and in anticipation of a recharge event. I would suggest that you want to see less than 5% to non-detectable nitrate nitrogen in your soil in anticipation of a recharge event. This is way in excess. Generally, we would multiply this by 2, assuming it's at a 6-inch depth, to get about 296 pounds of nitrogen, way in excess of what you'd want to see. And so far as targeting the appropriate amount of nitrogen, timing for our concept, the right amount, the right place, the right time, the right source of nitrogen. Control release nitrogens have been around for about, good 30 years now, and the science on them are well documented, and they have precision prills now that give you a duration of 3 to 6 to 12 months, 9 to 12 months, based on percent moisture and 70-degree Fahrenheit temperature and above. You will get this kind of duration. I've been a fan, and I've practiced use of control release prill fertilizer with just nitrogen in it, loaded with, in addition, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then you can get complete fertilizers, very good to help in the following areas. Why control release fertilizer could be very helpful in consideration that now we're going from being advised to do micro drip irrigation, conserve, be efficient with our water, to all of a sudden flood your farms to resupply the overdrafted groundwater aquifers. Well, why is it helpful to use control release fertilizers? It's one, reduced runoff, long lasting, cost efficient, and it's very efficient nutrient utilization. And that's all.
Thank you, Rogell. If we have any other questions, again, please use the chat. It looks like here there was a question in the chat.
Stop share.
Let's see here. Oh, looks like Daniel has answered the question.
I'd like to, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Let's see what that question was.
I'm sorry, and my colleague Aysha will go more into nitrogen and nitrate nutrient leaching.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Rogell. And if you could exit your presentation, that would be perfect.
Stop sharing. And let's see. Exit that.
Okay, Michael, if you'd like to begin your presentation, that'd be perfect.
Hello, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Roots with the Almond Board of California, and I'm going to talk a little more specifically on on-farm recharge in almonds. I'll go over a little bit of the detailed practical efforts in the field, some orchard and tree considerations, and then introduce the groundwater recharge guide that we have available. So I'll start off saying that ABC, the Almond Board of California, began funding groundwater recharge research in fall of 2015, 2016. These are some of the researchers from UC Davis, some of the cooperators from UC Cooperative Extension as well. There were 3 regional research sites for these trials that we did. Across all 3 of them, there was anywhere between 4 to 7 different flooding events during the winter dormancy at all 3 sites. In the Modesto and Delhi sites combined, there was 24 inches of water captured and flooded onto those fields. In the Delhi site, there were multiple flooding events over the time period. They had very sandy soils, and after a recharging event, the field returned to pre-flooding condition about 12 hours after each water application. The Modesto site had more loamy soils. They flooded once a week for 4 weeks. Because they didn't have as much sand and had more loam soils, the field remained saturated for about 48 hours after each flood event before returning to a pre-flooded condition. And then the Orland site had very low water penetration due to soil type. And when the trials were happening, there was also a lot of rainy and wet weather conditions, so the soil stayed waterlogged. This just shows that, as other people have mentioned, it really does depend on your soil and a proper site to do this. In the Modesto and Delhi sites, 80 to 90% of the applied water actually penetrated below the root zone and was actually going to recharging. Out of the research, there were no measured adverse effects on tree water status, canopy development, or yield. These were all done in dormancy. The groundwater recharge did not negatively affect new root production and tended to extend the root lifespan. So out of these research trials, researchers concluded that applying additional water during dormancy is not likely to have negative impacts on almond orchards in moderately to well-drained soils. Here are a few kind of orchard management decisions to consider. One major advantage of on-farm recharge is that per acre foot recharged, it's less expensive, as Daniel showed in some of his cost estimates. It's also a more distributed method than construction of new large dedicated recharge basins that are just going to be in one designated area. Recharge method design and operation can be used to avoid concerns over crop and tree health of diseases. One thing to remember, flood irrigation valves are preferred, even if you're already irrigating in a normal season with drip or micro sprinklers. So if you have an almond orchard and you're looking to redevelop, if you have field flood valves already, it would be a great idea to not take those out, even if you're going to put sprinklers or drip in. You don't have to use them to irrigate, but it's really handy to still have those valves and infrastructure available to do groundwater recharge on your blocks. Out of the research that I discussed, dormant season was the focus of the research. Fallow fields can also be good locations for recharge if you have open areas that you don't have anything in. It's also a good idea as you start trying groundwater recharge on your farm to have a comparison field without recharge, but with similar crop characteristics. So if you have 2 blocks with similar age, variety, rootstocks, and soil types, and you recharge on one and don't on the other, that's a good way to monitor the crop effects. And it's just also, depending on when you have water, you can do it in season, but you could also try and maximize it during the dormant season and fallow periods as well. Rogell had talked a little bit about this as well. So if you're not really set up for recharge, you can just put a berm around the perimeter of the field that you want to recharge. A lot of trees are on berms, which is a good part of mitigating risks to plant health because it keeps part of the roots above saturation. 3 of the different ways to improve infiltration and efficiency are alternate row irrigation or irrigation in sets. So you could flood every other row or every 3 rows in your field and then let it dry out, and then go on the other row, flood that and let it dry out. Surge irrigation is also another tactic to where you can just put a lot of water across the field, let it sink in, and then flood again, and let that sink in, and then flood again. This helps to increase the infiltration rate as well as limit ponding to where you just have water standing on the whole field. And then in some situations, complete ponding, especially in fields that have slower infiltration rates, is also a tactic. You can just put water out, wait for all of that water to sink in before going for another recharge event. Some other orchard management decisions. Anybody that's almond farmers know that excess water in or near orchards do have to have some careful consideration. UC IPM program has guidance for managing diseases that are caused by excess moisture. This is also just a good factor to think about when you're deciding if your orchard's a fit. So if you are recharging during the growing season, it's just good to keep in mind that you are at an increased risk of some of the diseases. And it's great to reach out to your PCA, your CCA, or your local farm advisor if you have any questions or concerns. And this is more specifically if you have water in the growing season and want to try recharge then. Out of the research that we've done, it shows that it's very safe to do this in the dormant season. So these are just some decisions and thoughts to think about if you're going to recharge and have water during the growing season. I'm also going to plug this Groundwater Recharge Introduction to Groundwater Recharge Guide that the Almond Board of California, as well as Sustainable Conservation, put together. The email here on the screen, fieldoutreach@almondboard.com. Feel free to send me an email. We can get you a physical copy of this guide, or we can get you a PDF version if you prefer. And then I also have contact information for a colleague of mine who is kind of the expert in groundwater recharge at the board. His name is Jesse Roseman, and his email is on here, jroseman@almondboard.com. So that's all I have. I'll leave this screen up for a minute if anybody wants to write those down and see if there's any questions. Do we have any questions, or can we move on to the next person?
Yeah. I can get going.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Michael.
Hi, everyone. Just going to get myself set up here. And my name is Aysha Massell, and I work at Sustainable Conservation. Just going to talk a little bit about water quality considerations. Can you all see my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So as some of you know, Sustainable Conservation embarked on developing some water quality guidance for on-farm recharge about 1.5 years or 2 years ago now. And our basic question was, how can on-farm recharge lead to clean drinking water, or at least prevent water quality problems? And so we focused on the potential impacts of on-farm recharge on salts, and in particular nitrate. And we included robust stakeholder engagement throughout the process, with over 30 individuals representing a wide range of perspectives and expertise, including academics and scientists, water managers from irrigation districts, GSAs, and all their consultants, environmental justice and conservation NGOs, government staff, and also grower representatives. And the result of all this effort is 2 water quality documents, which we refer to as version 1.0. And this nickname really acknowledges that there's a lot of work to do in solidifying the science and developing tools to support on-farm recharge. So the white paper on the left really gives an overview of the most current peer-reviewed literature that forms a scientific foundation of how to protect and even improve water quality while engaging in on-farm recharge. And on the right, you'll see the nitrate brief, which is a summary of the findings from the white paper. And it's focused mostly on nitrate management, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And it's really targeted to growers, water planners, and communities. And its purpose is really to empower stakeholders to engage in decisions and planning. And so there's not enough time today to go over all the findings of the papers. So I will focus on a risk assessment that we developed in a couple of slides here. But I do want to note that current nutrient management, which Rogell went over earlier, is really the single most important action we can do to protect groundwater quality now and into the future. We also include other tips, such as recharging on crops that have low nitrogen demand, such as grapes, to avoid continuing nutrient leaching. And also repeating recharge on the same locations rather than spreading out water over large areas occasionally will also help to reduce overall nutrient loading into the aquifer. And so at the end of my presentation, I'll send a link to these documents so you can check out more of the details when you have time. So one of our main findings from the papers is something you probably all know, which is nitrate contamination will likely get worse before it gets better in many places in the Central Valley. And this map is produced through the CV salts process, shows areas in red where nitrate already exceeds drinking water quality standards. And these red areas are likely to grow bigger before they diminish, regardless of any management actions like recharge. And this is because a lot of this contamination is due to over-application of nitrogen fertilizer in prior years and decades, and is what we refer to as legacy nitrogen. And one side note that we only hint at in the papers is that we at Sustainable Conservation see a fair amount of overlap between Sigma and CV salts when it comes to recharge projects. So since both GSAs and management zones are just now ramping up, we see a great potential to potentially align common objectives. And so, for example, you will see in the next couple of slides, there may be opportunities to use recharge to clean up already contaminated groundwater, which could further the objectives of both management zones and groundwater sustainability agencies. And so we're currently exploring this idea, and so we're definitely welcome any insights you have in this area. So in the papers, we provide a framework for risk analysis based on legacy nitrogen and existing groundwater quality. So for example, in this graph, we show a conceptual scenario in which a potential recharge site currently has good groundwater quality, but high or medium legacy nitrogen loading. The y-axis on the left here indicates nitrate concentrations, and this horizontal red line is the maximum contaminant level, or MCL, above which the water is unsafe for human consumption. On the x-axis, you will see time extending from now to 50 years into the future as a general estimate of time scale. Again, this is just conceptual, not actual. So if you look at the year 0 on the left and follow the tan band, which indicates a no recharge scenario, you will see that nitrate contamination increases over time and may or may not exceed the maximum contaminant level at some point in the future. And so that's indicated by the thickness of this band, which either peaks below the MCL line or above it. We just don't know. It's just an uncertainty, right? The blue band, which indicates a recharge scenario, is shown to potentially flush legacy nitrogen that is still in the soil into the groundwater, as you can see by an initial spike of nitrate concentrations. And this may or may not exceed the MCL depending on a variety of factors such as dilution. But despite the uncertainty, we can predict that any spike due to recharge, if it happens, is likely to occur sooner and resolve quicker than the no recharge scenario. So in this figure, the X and Y axes are the same as in the previous chart, but it shows a scenario in which a potential recharge site already has poor groundwater quality. So in this case, the water quality starts out above the MCL. And so in the no recharge scenario, this tan band, the nitrate eventually moves through the groundwater system and hopefully dips below the MCL at some point in the future. But however, recharge at this site, as indicated by the blue band, is likely to flush out and dilute nitrate in the groundwater table much sooner than a no recharge scenario. So in this case, groundwater may in fact be a powerful tool in helping to clean up already contaminated groundwater on a shorter time scale than otherwise would have occurred. And so just one note on this, it's important for us to remember that flushing nitrate away from one area may introduce it to other areas. And so an understanding of groundwater gradients and responses to recharge and pumping is important when we're looking to engage in this type of effort. And so a gentleman, a farmer, encouraged me to extend a general proposition to you, namely that if you are interested in understanding how recharge might influence water quality on your farm, you may want to consider taking water quality samples before and after recharge events to gather a set of data and either keep it for your own records or share it more generally so that the science around water quality and recharge gets better. There are plenty of researchers and organizations interested in this topic. So if you are open to collaborating, please let us know and we can help get you connected. And so just wrapping up, one thing became clear to us during this entire two-year-long process of developing these documents is that communities who might be impacted by recharge activities really must be included as decision makers. And one note here is that some communities are actually very interested in using recharge as a tool to help them improve their water reliability, including a local community in your region, Fairmead, where we are working with them on a recharge planning project to help them with their community drinking water well. So in other words, communities could be great partners in implementing recharge projects at the local level. So I'm just going to wrap this up. I have my contact information down here. Thanks for your time, and please feel free to reach out for any reason and just open it up for discussion or move on to the next speaker. Thank you all.
Thank you, Aysha. Again, if anybody has any questions, please type them in the chat. Otherwise, we will move on to Cole Upton, who is a grower here with us today. Cole, if you'd like to talk about your experience with recharge, that would be great.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, well, I started out early. My dad was a firm believer in using water again. He felt that a 5-horse pump was a lot cheaper than in those days a 30 or 40 horse deep well. So always done that. But now it's moved on to where I think flood irrigation and bringing the water back actually helps the recharge. We did for a while, we had permanent crops and we did switch to sprinklers for a while. But then we found that we just could not get the deep profile for irrigation that we needed during the hot months. So we put valves back on for the sprinklers as well. So my experience, I've been a director on various districts for almost 50 years. I'm on both the GSA boards in Merced and Madera. So I'm really interested in this recharge because I think that's the saving grace for what we're doing. And there's certain principles that I go by, and I'll just briefly let you know what it is. I don't think any surface water or deep well water should leave a basin unless it's a really big flood year and it cannot be beneficially used in the basin. And I think any water excess to an area or to a district should be used on the water next to it, adjacent to it. It really bothers me when I see districts or entities sending water outside the basin to another area. I just think that's very self-defeating. During the flood years in districts, I think water should be real cheap for growers. In Chowchilla, we've even given it away free some years in order to get it back in the ground. I also think you need to have a district should implement programs that encourage the recharge. And my own personal feeling is that if we don't get it right, we need to start idling land. And the program I prefer is something similar to the old ASCS programs, if some of the farmers remember that. In the old days, when you had cotton, corn, or a wheat crop, you had to idle a certain percentage, say 5% to 25%, in order for the price to keep up. That was the theory anyway, and everybody did it. I think we need to have something like that if we are going to fallow land where everybody participates. Now, if you have a situation where a guy has got wall-to-wall permanent crops, obviously that's going to be a problem until he gets ready to take some of them out. So you need to have a program where farmers can exchange or work out the system, or maybe a guy has row crops that he can idle the land for the permanent grower, get paid an appropriate price and that kind of thing. The bottom line is you want to get your groundwater in sustainability. We've got to do it by 2040 according to Sigma. So personally, and I've told the GSA boards that I'm on, I don't think we're moving fast enough. So I think we just need to get it done. You have a problem with the counties when they authorized new development, new wells on land that never been farmed before. I think that particular thing has come to an end. One of the issues that we have here in Madera and Merced County was the historical water rights. And for those that don't know, when Bryant Dam was built, they went out to the growers and the people in Merced, Madera, and Fresno counties, and they wanted folks to sign up for the water. And in those days, the water was right near the ground. So a lot of people said, "No, we don't do it. We can, pump from the underground cheaper." So it resulted in a lot of water today going all the way down to Bakersfield, Arvin, Edison, Delano, Early Mart. It's been going that way for a lot of years. And those people honored their contracts, so that's not going to change. So what we have now, we have farmers that have started growing in the heretofore land that wasn't been farmed out along the mountains. So that's created an issue that we're going to have to address. Last, I'd like to make a point on free-flowing creeks. I farm in Merced County on one ranch that is next to Deadman and Dutchman Creeks, would happen to be free-flowing creeks. And in 2017, we put in we had 4 canal pumps that we use when we got water from Merced ID. Anyway, we use that to access the floodwaters, and we have gotten over 900 acre feet of recharge into 4 different basins. So that's something that obviously needs to be utilized when those floodwaters occur. I know in the districts like Chowchilla and Madera that we're doing what we can to get the water in the ground. And Chowchilla has built several new basins already, and we have agreements with our neighbors that are outside the district to get water to them during the flood events. And the county has been good in appealing now to the Bureau of Reclamation to include all of Madera County as a place of use for Bryant Dam, which means that it'll make it legal to do it. So those are some of the things that my thoughts on it and what we're doing. But I really like to thank NCRS. We've had a couple of basins along with Habitat on our ranch that really work well, and they're great people to work with. So that's about it, Amy. If anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Cole. So it looks like I have a question in the chat from Ursula, but I'm not sure if this is aimed towards just a general. It says there is a large plume of some kind of contaminant from the old Castle Air Force Base that is migrating underground. Is Atwater an excellent recharge area as it appeared in the map? Secondly, if so, will recharge help or compound the problem? So I think this might just be a general question. So if one of the panelists wants to respond to Ursula, that would be great.
Yeah, I was actually typing a response, but yeah, just basically, yeah, it's an excellent question. And our work with water quality really focused on nitrate and salt. So we really can't answer definitively one way or the other. But just as a general response, different types of contaminants move differently. And so some are very mobile in water or not, some float, some sink. Also, when you introduce kind of surface water into groundwater, you can change the conditions that might alter how the chemical behaves. So it really depends on the type of contaminant. What I can do is I'll send you the links to our papers, but also send you a link to another paper about geogenic and some human-made contaminants and how that might affect recharge. That was made by a partner organization. And so, and just to follow up in terms of the map, I'm not sure which map you were referring to, but you know, the Land IQ map, for instance, doesn't take into account water quality. It takes into account a lot of other things. And so we're actually working on trying to get some type of geospatial understanding of water quality issues so we can better inform our recharge and other choices in water management.
Thank you, Aysha. So I think we could go next to Brian Davis, who is also experienced with recharge. Brian, if you'd like to present.
Yeah. Thank you for having me speak today. I just thought I would share some of my experiences. We farm, I am a family farm here in Madera, and we farm wine grapes and almonds. Primarily our recharge efforts have been on wine grapes, and so we've seen a good result from that. Actually, on today's presentation, Daniel's background and a couple of his photos in his presentation were of our vineyards, showing our cover crop that was being recharged. I think it was back in 2017 and around the late part of January. And that was one of the first times that we actually did some recharge, and we're quite surprised about how much water we can actually get into the ground. And it's something that we've noticed through the years, that when we've got a cover crop in the ground, we're able to penetrate and get water into the ground a lot better than when we have bare ground. So one of the things that I thought I would talk about today with you is things that I see in my area in terms of development. As it was mentioned today, we need to be more conscious of setting our fields up for on-farm recharge, and there's a little bit of planning that goes into that. And a couple of those are what's been mentioned already, designing the ground so that it can hold and take the water when you apply it, as well as the means for delivery. And what I see in my area sometimes, and I think I see it too often, is that ground changes hands and people come in to redevelop the ground to a new crop, and they don't take into consideration the potential for recharge in the future. And so they abandon their concrete lines that maybe once have already been there, and or they change the direction of their fields, which again abandons any potential benefit or possibility of recharging. So one thing I'd like to just say out loud and say to our neighbors is, recharge is a community effort, and the resource we put in the ground is water, and it's a communal asset for everybody, and we need it in the future. So when we redevelop ground, it would be nice to see that we do our best, that we can retain those recharge assets that we have already built into our systems that are already in place. And I think we've got some programs now in place to help growers maintain, repair, or implement new connections for recharge. And I like seeing that going. But as a few of the speakers have said, just to echo them, I think maybe Daniel, Roger, Michael, I think all three of them might have mentioned that Flood is the most efficient way to get water onto the ground. And if your ground is suitable, in our area, we've got a loam, sandy loam, and we've always done really well with getting water into the ground, and not too shortly after that, we're able to get back on the ground to do any activities that we need to do. And that goes into the recharge effort also, is just being prepared. So preparing your field is one, and then from year to year, I think it's important when we see the forecast possibly shows there may be some available water for that recharge. I think it's important for us to understand what activities need to be done so that it doesn't hinder our ability to take that water and put it in the field and make sure that we get our pruning or sprays or any kind of activities that we think we need to get done. So the two main times we've done quite a bit of flood irrigating or recharge, and that's been in 2017 and 2019. And as you saw from the pictures with Daniel, we put as much water as we can put on there and kept rotating the water around on about 160 acres. And never did we ever come to a point where we felt we had to shut the water off with rotating that water on the same block of ground. The vineyards were just absorbing that water as fast as we could put it out there, especially where the cover crop was. And I think that when we're recharging, like I said, it is a community effort, and I hope that in the future we can get more growers. I think maybe a little more outreach, I would have to say, is required to maybe talk to people before they redevelop so that they understand how important it is to maintain their systems. And I think that would be a better, use of funds. Always going back in hindsight and doing something a little more costly, but better late than never is okay as well. But I think as a grower, I would like to see more of my neighbors, and I know we have a lot of people doing it too. I think the numbers show that we're doing a lot more than we've ever done. And as a young farmer, I know how important it is for my kids to have water available in the future for them to farm with. So any chance we can get together as a community and take this water, the districts are there to provide the water for us, but it's really a grower's effort to get this water into the ground. And I do believe that on-farm recharge is the best way here to get that water into the ground in the short term. In the future, I'm sure we'll have plenty of recharge basins and reservoirs to take this water, excess water, but without going through too much energy, cost, and expenses. Really, the on-farm recharge, I think, is the result, or is the fix for our groundwater depletion at this time. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Brian. And next we have, if there's any questions for Brian, please feel free to type them in the Q&A. I think there was a question, and I need to check the chat if it was answered, but if we could only use so much water this year before being charged extra, how can we recharge without extra fines? So if we're able to address this question, that would be great.
And Blower, I'm not sure what your name is, says Blowery. I wanted to ask what the fines are there. Fines sound like it might be groundwater fines, or are you talking about free water like Brian was talking about, and having being charged for surface water? Because I know that the Madera program offered free water for a portion of the winter period, but then started to gradually increase the charges on that water. And that certainly reduced the participation of growers taking that water. But it wasn't a fine, it was just, you had to pay more for it. And that's because it was getting into the growing season. And some of that water was being used for, agricultural benefit for crop demand. So maybe you can, communicate to us if there's something about fines that I'm not following.
Yes, that sounds great. If you could type that in the chat for more clarification, that would be great. And I think after that we can move forward with Ralph Distressy's presentation. Ralph, if you'd like to begin, that would be great.
Well, it's not working, Steve. Oh, there it goes. Okay. All right. I'm Ralph Ceresi. I know a lot of the people that have spoken. I know Brian, I know Cole Upton. What I'm going to speak to is maybe a general farmer's concern with what's going on today. And we had a flood event, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 years ago, where we were able to do some recharge. And I think we need to address the issues that we were confronted with back in that time. We were trying to get permission to pump flood flows. And I think it behooves the state of California to make it flood flows available wherever they occur to who can pick them up and put it in the ground. And we need to take care of that. And I think it's part of the GSAs, their managers, the people that administrated these GSA programs, to make that pathway clear for farmers like us, Brian, Cole, whoever wants to participate. That when the bypass is running with water and the Chowchilla irrigation, the MID, Madera irrigation, can flood their canal systems with water, that water is all made available, that we don't have to go through some certification, some permission, some form, some bureaucratic red tape to get water that's just blowing out to the ocean. The problem with all of this groundwater problem is because when they put the dams up, all the natural flooding that occurred around here for hundreds of years didn't happen anymore. And then apart from that, when we went to the drip irrigation, we're putting less water in specific parts like other people have spoken to, and not putting enough water in the ground. So in our farming operation, we farm in different counties, but in Madera and Chowchilla more particularly, we have always kept in the underground pipeline system from the crop that was before. And this allows for us to use flood irrigation, which is the easiest, best way to put these waters on. What was spoken of before, the vineyard is the best place to put the water on, because you can put all kinds of water on a vineyard and not hurt it. Matter of fact, you have vineyards, especially if the ground's a little bit more alkali, like we have one ranch in the Red Top area, where in the last flood event, we were able to pump water from the bypass onto the ranch. Like I could flooded it 4 times, solve the alkali problem. It's unbelievable. And the ground takes unbelievable amounts of water, like that Lodi example that someone pointed out. So what we do, and what we would recommend everybody to do, is to have their ranches set up, like Brian was saying. When you take a ranch over, don't just go in there and bulldoze all the infrastructure out, which, like, no, some people have done. Perfect ranches for recharge have been destroyed. And I know which ones they are, Madera, all right? Because they weren't thinking, because they think instead of the rows going east and west, we want to turn all the rows north and south. Makes no sense, but they do it. So I think having the ranch set up and cooperation between sometimes adjoining farmers. We have one piece of property in Red Top where with our neighbor, our ranches are 2 pretty good sized pieces of ground. We have like 700 and some acres, and he's got like about, I don't know, he's got 1,000 or 2,000 acres, a dairyman. And we've actually connected our irrigation systems together so that during a flood event, I can take these canal pumps that I have, and I can put them in the bypass and pump water through his system, because we cooperate with each other. And he could put that water on his ground. And when his ground becomes where he can't do it any longer because it's a dairy operation, he can run the water through his pipeline into our pipeline system, and I can take all the water that I can get on it. So we need to do this, and we need to figure out how to put the most amount of water we can in the ground. And then we have to figure out also a system that the benefit that you're creating, you're going to get some sort of a credit to be able to continue farming. Because I see here in the very short future, we're going to have a lot of problems. We're going to have legal problems. We're going to have some very mad farmers. It's going to get ugly. If we don't solve these problems, it's going to get real ugly. Because people don't plant crops that's supposed to last 30 years and then told to pull them out. That's not going to go down too good. So we need to solve these issues. The state needs to take a more active part, not just in dictating to us these things that they want, and they don't set the proper priorities that they should in control of the water that comes through this state. Because we need to set priorities. They're not setting priorities. You know what's important? Everybody has to have water and they have to have food. Some people need a few more things, but excuse me. You need water and you need food. All right. You see what happens when the price of food goes up? People can't afford to buy food with this inflation. All right. How's it going to be when we're not producing our own food? How's it going to be? What do you think water is? What do you think food is but water? Food is nothing but water. It's a function of water. It takes so much water to grow a pound of beef. It takes so much water to make a gallon of milk, and it's not a gallon of water. It's hundreds of gallons of water. So I think there's a lot of things that need to happen. We could talk about recharge, but we also have to talk about educating people, the people that aren't farmers, to understand the importance of what we do and our necessity for water. We have a need for water. And water is used for recreation. It's used for restoring fish populations. We lose water because we grind up some ferry, not the shrimp, that worthless fish on the delta that they're making a big deal over. What is it called? Smelt, the smelt, right? Because they don't want to grind up a smelt. Only indigenous to the area, we don't get water down here to farm with. When you don't get water to farm with, you don't have an economy anymore. People don't have jobs anymore. I can show you Fireball and Mendota area. There's no more tomatoes, there's no more garlic, there's no more onions, there's no more anything. So we need the right priority in government to get the right things happening here. The other thing that we need to do is we need to be ready for when the flood event comes. I was taught one thing by a friend of mine. He says, in life, it's important to understand the rule of the 6 Ps. The 6 Ps are this: poor preparation produces piss poor performance. And that's what happens. We're not ready. We have to be ready. When it's going to rain, you have to have your fields ready. You have to have your equipment ready. You have to have your organization ready to take advantage of situation. And we can't be all ready and then the state says, no, you know what? We can't let you pump any water going over because of water right. It's a flood, for Christ's sakes. I've seen the bypass flood like the Colorado River. going through there. And it's all going to the ocean. All waste is not going in the ground. So these are the things that we need to do.
Ralph, I have a question
we
for
need-
you in the chat. Sorry to interrupt,
Sure.
but I have a question for you. It says, have your wells improved with recharge?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they improve. You know, the thing that we need to do is, you know, I see on the GSA here in Madera, they're throwing a blanket carpet over the whole county. Blanket carpet. They're saying everybody's going to get this much, this much, this much. There's certain areas where the water is actually a problem. It could be a problem in Madera. We need to move the water from there to where it isn't a problem. And what we need to do also, and we're doing it, is we need to monitor the amount of your standing groundwater level. Like on that red top ranch we have, it's perfectly, there's no ranch more perfect set up for it than that. It's got canals that go through the ranch. I can take water off the bypass. When Chowchilla has extra flood water, they can send it my way and put it in the ground. And this is where I think districts and even white areas need to work with each other, because one might have a comparative advantage where it can help the other one out. And it does raise, it maintains the groundwater level. On that ranch, I put the ranch water all over the ranch, but I was able to put on about 120 acres, the ranch water flooded it 5 foot high, all right? And it took the water. And what you'll notice is when the ground starts taking water, it takes it faster. Once it opens up and it starts taking water, it'll take it even faster. So, you know, it's kind of exciting to get the water and put it in the ground. We're willing to do it. We don't even need to be paid to do it. We're willing to spend the money, all right? But we need cooperation from the GSAs, the State Water Board that determines, you know, who can pump these excess flows. So.
And Ralph, I have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
Have you practiced on farm recharge? If so, on what crops? And how did you prepare your fields for this?
All right, okay. Our fields have always been set up for flood irrigation. So what I do is I put a 1/4 fall per 100 and not more than that in the fields. They have a little bit of fall, but not too much fall. And we've always kept all the pipelines, all the underground cement lines, we keep them in place. Then we incorporate drip irrigation on top of that, so that I have the option to go either flood or drip. Now, we farm almonds, we farm prunes, we farm grapes, we farm pistachios, olives, and cherries, all right? But most of our production is in grapes, which great for recharge. Almonds will work too. So what I would say is you have to look at the crop you're growing, the ground, your conditions, and what you can do without doing damage. For example, on the video, on the picture behind Daniel's presentation, I saw a vineyard that was flood irrigated that was just grafted. I would never, ever do what that guy did. And because when you're grafting, you have to monitor the amount of water that the vine gets, and you want to not get too much water or you'll start to graft. I'd be really interested to see how that field took, because you can ruin a field like that. So you have to have a knowledge of what you're growing and the amount that you can put on to accomplish your recharge purpose and yet not damage your crop. But we farm, I would say the vineyard is the one you can put the most water on. I would say prunes and pistachios, you can put a lot of water on. Almonds, you got to be careful. Almonds, you have to be careful. could do the alternate irrigation row thing, but you have to be careful on almonds because if you overdo it and it gets windy, the trees will fall over. You know, it's a balancing act.
Thank you, Ralph. There's one more question for you. Have other neighbors in Red Top been recharging besides the dairy?
My neighbor, you know, they have been recharging. There's one neighbor over there is a large vineyard operation, wine group. They found ways to recharge too, and their fields are not really set up with lines like that, but they've opened the valves up and they let the water run wherever it's going to run, and it works. So every farmer knows his own ranch and how to do it. And the dairyman, okay, he can, at that particular time of the year, he's trying to take his crops off for silage and different things. So he has to be a little bit careful. But using his irrigation system and how he has it, when we work together, you know, if I put the water on my ranch, under my ranch, his wells are right next to it, so he's going to get the benefit. Then I think the other thing that needs to be done, we need to take a look at the sloughs that we have going through Chowchilla and Madera. We have to figure out how to keep the water in the slough longer and in the sandy ground longer. We have some land that's a slough where we have acreage that's real sandy ground. And if there's a way of diverting it or pumping it temporarily on those very sandy parcels of ground, it serves the same as a reservoir or basin. A good point that was brought up was to use the farms instead of reservoirs. We have to think about how to accomplish things without spending money. And the farms is the cheapest way to put the water in the ground. You could go and try to buy land from farmers to create a reservoir, but you're gonna spend $1 million to buy 40 acres. When we have hundreds of acres, we'll let you put water on for free. See what I mean? It's more of a benefit to the district to go 2 miles outside of the district and put the water in the ground than it is for the district to spend millions of dollars in saying they're putting it on their particular district. I mean, you could have a combination of both, but we need to do everything. The other thing I think is important, in drought years, I think it's important for irrigation districts. I talked to the person from Brandon from Chowchilla, that there should be a plan where in case there is no surface water, that ranchers and farmers have pumps near irrigation canals or systems. There should be a plan where we can use an emergency situation, pump water for a neighbor, where it get him by, you know, an emergency. You know, all it is involved in it is planning. So that's, you know, a couple ideas.
Thank you so much, Ralph. I have a couple of questions that came up. One of them looks like was from Joe for Cole. So Cole, the questions that were mentioned is, can you elaborate on the basins with habitat benefits you mentioned? Have you used these basins for recharge? What are the habitat benefits? And did you say that the NRCS helped fund these projects? So this question is for Cole. Let's see, Cole, you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, we had 2 of them that the NCRS helped fund, and the habitat that we have is primarily for it's waterfowl, but there's also like Swenson hawks, red-tailed hawks. We even have burrowing owls at one time. Haven't seen one of those in a couple of years, but there's all kinds of birds. My daughter-in-law is a wildlife photographer, and she could give you pictures of all of it. It's actually quite remarkable. So it's sort of a win-win. It's good for the environment and it's also good for the underground.
Thank you, Cole. And thank you, Ralph, for your presentation as well. If we have any more questions for Ralph, Brian, or Cole, please type them in the chat. I think we could go to Q&A session now. If anybody has additional questions, you could raise your hand and I can unmute you. So feel free now to ask any questions to the panelists.
I have a question for Brian if no one else has any questions. Brian, you mentioned in 2017 and 2019 that you implemented on-farm recharge on approximately 160 acres of vineyards. And I believe you also did some on a young almond orchard. Are you planning on expanding either crops or acreage of on-farm recharge in the future?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Yeah, you know, our experience, again, as Ralph was mentioning, is a vineyard has somewhat of the proper setup for infiltration and penetration already. The ground, as we manage our vineyards, or a lot of our vineyards have a cover crop or some ground vegetation on the ground, so that allows the water to get into the ground much quicker and more abundantly. On the orchard side of things, the ground typically, because of the management style of orchards, the water doesn't penetrate as well or as quickly. And so it's a little bit more of a burden to properly rotate water around in an almond orchard. But either or would be fine with us. In our operation, we just have so much property that is vineyard within Madera's irrigation district that we're able to take that water. And as Ralph said, I think the goal for everybody is to reduce the costs of implementing this recharge. And that allows us to do much more recharge and make whatever money we do spend towards it go a longer way. So a lot of our vineyards are fed through gravity feed through the irrigation districts. So it's really easy to just open up a valve from the district and receive that water. And like, as Ralph said, you know, have the staff and have the preparation to take that water, have our activities done to take that water. And regarding vineyard, it just seems that's usually the most easy crop for us to apply water during a season of maybe flood flows. Whereas in the trees, we've got several activities going on early in the year that are such as any dormant sprays to prevent diseases, or placing bees and having our bloom occur, and being able to you know, also spray a fungicide at that time. So there's certain things that are a little bit more restricting on the almond side of things, but I don't see those are the options that a grower has. I don't see why they wouldn't also be able to participate in one fashion or another.
Thank you.
Similar to what Cole was saying is, or one of the speakers were mentioning is, you know, there is no maybe prescribed way to recharge. It's really, for us, it's open up the gates and let it flow and capture as much as we can possibly get. And, you know, we hope our neighbors are doing the same. But if they're not, you know, it's our goal to do that and to lead, and hopefully, you know, our neighbors see the benefit and they want to join us as well. And I think one of the questions earlier about, you know, the cost prohibitive, like, you know, when can you stop taking that surface water because it becomes expensive?
I'm sorry to cut you off, Brian. There is one more presentation, and I do want to get to her. And it's Wendy with NRCS. And then from after that, I would like to continue this discussion. I think it's a great discussion. Okay. So Wendy, if you'd like to present, that would be great.
Thanks, Brian.
All right.
see, let me get rid of that. All right. Well, good morning. Still morning for a few more minutes. My name is Wendy Rash. I am with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And thank you, Cole, for the shout out earlier. Cole's already worked with us with some work on his farm. And I'm glad to hear you had a good experience. That's always great. And I'm going to talk about what NRCS is doing to support groundwater recharge now and what we hope to do more of as we move along into the future. So just a little bit of a primer on how NRCS works with growers. Our first step is really to talk with growers about what their issues are on their farm and do an inventory of those issues and opportunities on the farm. And then come up with a conservation plan with the intent to address those issues. And so in our lingo, we call it that inventory and those we call those resource concerns. So issues you may be having on the farm, like groundwater depletion is now one of our resource concerns. And then we address those with what we call conservation practices. So we have a whole catalog of practices that we can help you apply on your farm. So with technical help to get it done, but then also potentially financial help. So just an example of that, this doesn't have anything to do with groundwater recharge because you can't really take a good picture of groundwater depletion. But on the left there on your screen, you see a road that pretty obviously has some soil erosion resource concerns going on. And then on your right is a picture of a road that has been treated with some conservation practices. So you can see there's a diversion on the inboard side of that road, and there's also been mulch applied to the road and even a little bit of grass coming up probably from seed in that hay mulch. And so that's an example of how we would identify a resource concern and then treat it with a conservation practice or two. So groundwater depletion was only recently added to our official list of resource concerns. Don't ask me why it took so long. I am not sure. But now that it's there, now that we can address that, we needed to have some conservation practices that were designed to treat the resource concern of groundwater depletion. And so using the research that's been going on in California over the last 10 years by sustainable conservation and universities and a lot of other groups, we came up with 2 interim practice standards. So interim just means that we're still testing them out. They have not been fully adopted by our national headquarters as conservation practices yet. But we have 2 of them. The first is the recharge trench or basin. And so that is area that's dedicated specifically for recharge. There's not active farming going on there. And those built structures are intended to be in place for 15 years. So that's the commitment that you make if you choose the trench or basin. The on-farm recharge is the more annual management practice, which we've been talking a lot about today, where you are flooding actively farmed fields. So what we are doing with the pilot program is we are doing some field testing of these practices. We know that folks all over the valley have already been trying them out, but we need to collect kind of our own documentation. So we're looking at whether the practices are effective. Are they getting water down into the groundwater table? And how do those practices work with our assistance programs? So, our staff also needs to learn about these practices and learn how to help farmers with them. And then also moving through to the funding phase as well. So our funding comes, as you may know, through the Farm Bill, the conservation title. Our most popular and our most well-known program is EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So after we've done that inventory, after we've come up with a conservation plan, the growers decided, what it is they really want to do. For groundwater recharge, all of those things that we've talked about today, the agronomics, which field, what's the suitability of that field, what's the suitability of the crop, how do we need to sort of plan that recharge activity so that you don't damage your crop and that we get the best recharge that we can. Then that plan can be converted into a contract, can be selected for funding with financial assistance. So with our Recharge pilot program, again, our goal is to field test these practices. We only had about $2 million available for fiscal year 2022. Our fiscal years run October to September. Because we had a limited amount of funds, we also limited the area. We tried to choose areas where the districts were very supportive of groundwater recharge, where we knew that they were going to be able to supply water to growers who wanted to participate. The application period did close on April 1st, but hold on. I'm going to talk in just a couple minutes about the things that we can help you do right now with NRCS programs. Within the pilot program, because we are trying to gain some information from these projects, we are requiring that there be a well nearby that we can use to monitor what's going on with water levels, potentially also with water quality, and that there be an assured water source, which is why we tried to place our pilot in areas where we know that the districts are going to be able to supply water. So right now, our pilot program is available throughout Madera County, in Merced County, just in this area of the Chowchilla Water District, in Tulare County and Kern County, only within the boundaries of Tulare Irrigation District and Delano Erlemart Irrigation District. So this is the pilot program area that we are working with right now. Okay, so I want to stress that our plans and contracts can include supporting practices. So all those things that folks have talked about today that help you prepare your field for recharge, for the basin or trench, might be a structure for water control, inlets, outlets, turnouts, flow meters, so that you know how much water is actually moving into that basin or trench. Any pre-treatment of water that might be necessary if you are pulling flood flows that have a lot of sediment. Of course, we don't want those basins to silt up, and so there might be a pre-treatment with a sediment basin, something like that. For the on-farm recharge, the water conveyances, again, if pipelines need to be reestablished, if pumping needs to happen, and then diversions, dikes, again, to move water to the site, land shaping to make the field fall and accept that water. So these are all conservation practices that can be paid for as part of an EQIP contract. So these are things that we can do now. These are things, whether or not you're inside the pilot area or outside the pilot area, okay? You can work with your NRCS local office to do these kinds of practices. So you can also start planning for next year. If you are lucky enough to be within the pilot program area, we hope to expand it slightly with area and funding next year, but we're not sure what that looks like. We know we will be in the same areas again next year. We can help you prepare your fields for recharge. Okay, so if you are interested in doing this, we can help you outside of the pilot program areas. We can start that, working with you on that plan now. Evaluating your site, the ground on your site, the crops that you have, working with you on nutrient management, as many folks have mentioned, that being a very, very important piece of protecting water quality. Same thing with irrigation water management. Those two things really go hand in hand of managing where the nitrogen is moving from fertilizers. And on pest management. So if there are pest control materials that folks are worried about getting into the groundwater, we can work with you on pest management conservation systems. Again, those water conveyances and control structures and any pre-treatment of that recharge water that might be required. So the financial assistance piece of this, what I'm showing you is what our reimbursement rates are for the recharge practices themselves. So all of those other practices also are paid on different rates. I don't have time to get into all that, but you would see those as you work with your local NRCS office, see what those payment rates are. So you can see on your screen the recharge trench or basin for the trench. It's by the cubic yards of excavation required to build that trench. For the basin, it's paid by the acre foot of storage capacity. So 2 examples there. If you had a 5 acre foot basin, it would be about a $20,000 reimbursement from NRCS. If you had a 20 acre foot basin, it would be around $80,000 of reimbursement. And it is a reimbursement after the structure is built. And of course, you have to have a contract first. Before anything happens, you have to have a contract with us. So we cannot pay for anything that's in place before we have a contract. For the on-farm recharge, that is paid on a per acre basis. So per acre inundated, that's an annual payment. So if you have the ability to recharge more than once in a season, it's still that same rate. Okay, so for the winter, to do that management, to put water on the ground. And if we do are unfortunate enough to have more drought years coming up, if the practice can't be performed, we can't pay on it. Unfortunately, that's the way that one works. But we can still pay for those practices that are necessary to set your field up for the on-farm recharge. So our next steps here at NRCS, continuing the pilot project next year, we're going to be implementing this year's projects and monitoring those projects. Some expansion of the pilot program may be possible for next year, but we still do not expect these practices to be available statewide, the groundwater recharge specific practices. We'll be reviewing the data that we get from our pilot program, both here in California and at national headquarters. And our goal is that our groundwater recharge practices will be adopted into our technical guide. And once that happens, then we will be able to bring that out statewide and have it as, you know, one of our standard practices that we're able to offer. If you want to start planning, if you want to get started on some of this work, and you know, I appreciate what Ralph said about, you know, you're ready to go, you're ready to do this on your own dime, but if you do need some assistance, please come talk to us, and we can help you out. These are the 4 offices that have ground in the pilot program areas. If you're outside of these counties, you can still go to NRCS and talk with them about planning. That's all I have. I hope I hit the time. And
Thank you so much, Wendy. It looks like there's a question for you.
Okay.
So it says, so I can apply for an EQIP grant to level, pipeline, and build a return system as I prepare for a new planting. And later, if I get into a recharge pilot project, I might get paid for recharging.
Yes, that is accurate. So yes, you can apply for EQIP to do all of those steps to prepare the field. So the land leveling, conveyances, pipelines, that kind of thing, the return system, yes. And then in the future, now that your field is all set up, in the future when those practices become available, you could come back and reapply to do those recharge practices.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Cole, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, you're kind of breaking out. Did you say yes or?
No, I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay, sorry. And if we wanted to go back to Brian's discussion with Joe, I was sad to cut you off, but I wanted to get into Wendy's presentation. But if we have any other questions as well for the panelists, if you know you'd like to raise your hand, I could unmute you, or if you want to type them in the chat or in the Q&A. I think I saw the question about the extra fines. I think that just had to do with surface water charges. So that was the clarification. Daniel, you're on mute.
Amy, if there aren't other questions, I thought maybe Ralph's comment about the photo in the background of my image here, which is actually Brian's farm, about grafting and recharging on grafting. Maybe Brian might want to comment on what risks he saw or impacts he might have seen. I was kind of curious, Brian, if Ralph's concerns were of concern to you.
We grafted that field, and it just so happened to work out that water became available, and we felt that it was suitable to put that water on, and we saw no adverse effects to it at all. And it was just like putting water on any other field. So I think one of the things, it might have been Cole was talking about this, is maybe, and it ties into what we see in the background on here is, we're going to be rotating crops. It's, as a permanent farmer, permanent crop grower, we will one day have to rotate from one crop to the next. And I always tell myself I like to go from vineyards to almonds and almonds to vineyards and just kind of jump around so that we, rehab the soil somewhat, so that we're just not putting the same crop on the same soil too many generations in a row. So there is a time when we have to rotate, and at that time, that's where we take the best chance to get in there and clean up the field, like someone had mentioned, laser the field, get it ready, and now keeping recharge in mind, sloping the field suitable to take that recharge water. If you don't plan on flood irrigating regularly, at least you can slope a field in order to accommodate for a reasonable flow of water if you maintain your flood in there. But obviously we rip our ground, we break up our hard pan, we make the permeability of the soil much better, so that when this water comes in, we know we don't have that hard pan layer down there restricting our recharge potential. And also it's good for the crop. So a lot of things that we do, that we think we do for our vineyards and orchards and redevelopment, is very similarly in line with some of the things that we ought to be doing, or we probably should be doing in recharge preparation. And I think it's nice when NRCS and other organizations come together to help supply a little funding, because when we do develop these fields are very expensive now to redevelop. Inflation's only made it worse. And as we see some of those costs push farmers into a particular direction, and it doesn't give them as many options as they thought because of maybe financial constraints. So seeing NRCS come in and others that are going to help supplement some of these costs, I think are a good way to help farmers continue to maintain their systems and eventually help out with the recharge effort. I think when we redevelop, looking forward, looking into the future, if we can prepare, like Cole says, there's sometimes a set aside program to help maintain prices back in the day, but we may see something like that come back into play, where when your crop is expired and you're going to redevelop, you may choose to keep that crop out of production for a few years to help reduce the demand on the groundwater, and also be available for that surface water recharge. So that might be ways that we integrate new recharge programs, because as we set aside a ground from one crop to the next, you might find 2 to 4 years where you can make a temporary basin to help be available during that time for recharge, where you don't have to make a permanent structure, and give the ground a little bit time to rehab itself and to come back into a healthier state before we put a new crop back on. So those are some ideas I think that we're thinking of in our operation, and how to integrate that into the finances and say, okay, this can work because we're going to have to make these steps, and it's a part of our process now. It's a part of our farming operation.
Great, thanks. I could keep asking questions, but hopefully there's other folks out there. I'll throw another one in for Brian. The cover crop use that you have in your field. There's been a lot of discussion recently with GSAs about water demand from cover crops, and concern that establishing a cover crop might be deducted from your water allocation, your groundwater pumping allocation. So there's that question of the liability of using cover crops, but also curious about how well the cover crops did under recharge inundation. because you did mention that, you know, I think all of us realize you get better infiltration with the roots of a cover crop. So we improve the water supply and hopefully are not being penalized for establishing them. And just curious how well they survived with the recharge.
Well, you know, when you integrate cover crop into your operation, I think over the course of several years, and there's other farmers out there much older than me that have been working with annual grasses and cover crops for a lot longer than I have. I have to learn a lot from my dad. He tells me how to do this. And so it takes a long time to learn the behavior. But from what little bit that I've been able to experience, you know, you still have to take care of your cover crop. If you're not going to get these winter rains to help supplement some moisture into the ground, we don't think about the vineyard or the orchard too much. I mean, we do for extended lengths of drought during the winter time. We do know that we need to keep moisture down there for those roots. But for the cover crops, you know, a lot of times it's actually quite costly to manage a cover crop. The preparation needed to prepare the soil, and if you haven't had any moisture in the ground, you may pre-irrigate if you don't have a rain event in the near future, and then you have to disc it in. You have to prepare your ground for the later activities that you're going to do, such as cutting the canes or pruning. So you have to have a flat ground, and if you're going to take this cover crop in the springtime and chop it back and not work it into the ground and let it lay down as some sort of a ground cover, you know, we have sulfuring activities and spray activities where, you know, our ground has to be smooth so that our employees are not flying off the tractor or hitting bumps or, you know, bad ground. So to prepare for a cover crop is quite expensive. And, you know, just recently now through the use of the monitoring system through, you know, these outside areas of non-district ground, that cover crop is a draw on water. And it's really something going to be difficult for farmers now to consider the best use of water. And so we have to think, is the best use of minimal water the growth of the vine and the crop and the tree and the nuts and the crop itself, or soil health and fertility? And there's ways to supplement soil health and fertility through compost and manures. And maybe periodically, every so many years, maybe you decide to do a cover crop because it's been a while and you think this might be a good time to do it. But it's going to come into the decision-making process, at least for us. There's other ways to get organic matter into the ground, but we are a big fan of cover crop. Whenever we can and we see a need, we put it in there. If the field, you know, sets itself up for it, we try to put it in there. And sometimes, you know, if labor's short or if water's going to be short that year, or it just doesn't call for it, we have to not cover crop. But it is going to be a challenge, and I really don't have an answer on what growers are going to do. But I suspect, you know, you're gonna put your money where your return is going to be, you know, and so you're not going to just put a cover crop out there if it's going to be a draw on your bottom line, if you're not going to see some sort of improvements on your production or your efficiency. And if the water is too costly, you know, you're probably going to choose to put that water somewhere different and not pursue a cover crop. So that's going to be a tough one for California to stomach, where growers start choosing a different route to put their water instead of potentially doing what we all think is best for the ground, which is, you know, keeping organic matter and keeping the ground open. So it's a tough choice. I don't know what growers are going to do, but we all have that choice to make.
Yeah, and there's a comment from Thomas earlier too about evaporation and how evaporation and water conservation can be achieved, and, you know, leaving mulches or cover crop residue, of course, are ways to reduce the loss of irrigation water to evaporation. So that's another trade-off.
Yeah, there's a trade-off for cover crop management, whether you're using that fodder down there to cover and smother any grasses that might, additional weeds that might pop up that you have to manage as a grower. Weeds that are nuisance weeds, or disking it in if you're getting some nitrogen fixating through certain cover crops, and you're going to work it back into the ground. So those are choices that with a cover crop that you need to make. And again, everybody has their own way of doing it and their own idea about what's best for them.
Brian, do you work your cover crop back into the soil for organic matter or not?
Yeah, you know, we've done both. We've, in some years, we've chosen to, you know, pursue more of a no-till system where we put a cover crop in and then mow that cover crop down and keep it as ground mulch, if you will, to just sort of lay there and reduce the amount of passes and amount of activity we put into the field. And on other years, you know, especially if years are wet, I would say that I don't mind leaving it in the ground if there's available surface water. It's a great way to get water into the ground more. You know, cost prohibitive if the water is usually on these really wet years. We should expect to see, I think, a more affordable price of water so we can afford to buy more water and put it in the ground. And some of it goes to the benefit of the cover crop to keep on growing it. Some of it goes to the vine, some of it goes back to recharge. But we've done both on both sides, and I really don't, you know, management of the field is important too. So if we do that activity where we mulch it and keep it on the surface and we're not disking and tilling the soil, sometimes we're getting outbreak of weeds that we normally want to control. And we're just like any other grower. I think we have a good handle on it, but once in a while things get out of control, and you got to sort of clean things up. So, as a management style, we have done both things.
There's a question in the chat. How do you assess the infiltration gain from a rainfall event from a cover crop versus not having vegetation in your vineyard or orchard? Also, having the cover crop during the winter. Winter season. Oh my goodness, hold on. Sorry, I just scrolled.
During the winter dormant period, which is also the rainy season. Yeah, Ben, great question. It's one that a lot of us are asking right now. I mean, it's conceptually, I think what Brian has pointed out already is, you know, that benefit, that infiltration means you're going to perhaps hold more water, not so much avoid runoff, but many of these farms are not having runoff problems so much as holding it in the soil profile for later crop use if you're building up organic matter. But the cost of that, putting that water on in the first place is really the big challenge right now. I think Kearney Research Center is doing some trials on this, and Rogell or Aysha, I don't know if you can comment on that, but I know this topic is being tested right now in terms of a water budget, total water balance. Does it have a net benefit for water versus a net loss? And it's a big interest to all of us that are thinking about soil health, water retention, and reduced evaporation. You're on mute, Amy.
If we have any additional questions, please raise your hand or type them in the chat. Otherwise, we can conclude today's workshop event. And if you have any additional questions that come up after, please feel free to reach out to me and I could send these questions to the panelists. Oh, and looks like somebody just added one more thing in the chat. It says using the WHC of the soil to capture rainfall.
Water holding capacity, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you all so much. And for our wonderful panelists today and presenters, thank you for preparing your presentations for this event. We really appreciate it. And to everybody who participated today, thank you very much. We're going to have a recording of this workshop and I'll distribute this after it's been concluded. So thank you all again for attending today and for your participation. Bye, everybody.